Welcome back to Sleepy History Tales, where ancient mysteries, half-true, half-dream stories of history are told slowly, like a candle burning quietly in the dark. Before we begin tonight's journey, I want to take a moment to say a deep thank you. The channel has just reached the milestone of its first 1,000 subscribers. A small number, but for me, it is both a joy and a great encouragement. Each subscription, each comment, each time you sit and listen to the end of the story is the reason why I continue to tell, to continue to dig deeper into the misty pages of history. Thank you. Those who have accompanied me since the very beginning. It is you who have turned Sleepy History Tales from an idea into a small shelter for those who love history and unsolved mysteries. And now, if you're ready, let's open the door to tonight to enter a story that is both ancient and familiar. A story that can make you shiver, but is gentle enough to put you to sleep. She arrived one grey afternoon at the gates of Claremont Psychiatric Hospital in Paris, the year 1883. She carried no luggage, bore no wounds, and showed no outward signs of illness. Yet, when the admitting physician asked why she had come, her answer chilled him. "I have been dead for years. I am here for proper placement." Her name was carefully written into the hospital ledger, and just as curiously erased some weeks later. She refused mirrors, insisting her body was rotting in places no one else could see. She refused food, saying a ruined stomach could never hold nourishment. At night, she would drift silently through the halls, standing at the doors of other patients, whispering that their stay was over, that death itself was on its way. This was not the fevered rambling of delirium. Her conviction never wavered. In time, it began to unsettle even those tasked with treating her. Dr. Adrienne Léon, her attending physician, admitted in a private note, "If she is to be cured, I must persuade her she is alive. But I cannot seem to persuade myself." If you're with me now, listening to this story unfold, pause for a moment. Tell me, where in the world are you tonight? What hour touches your window? It is strangely comforting to know that across scattered time zones, across countless rooms, we are gathered together here, unraveling the tale of the girl who believed she was already dead. Winter 1883. The Fournier farm stood apart from the road, a squat rectangle of stone with shutters crusted in frost, and a chimney that exhaled only in brief, careful bursts. According to the parish clerk's ledger, the family was modest but steady 2 milk cows, a sow, 4 children. The youngest was a girl of 12, Marie. That morning, the family gathered at their table as always. Bread was cut, milk warmed, and a thin jam spread between them. When her turn came, Marie quietly declined. "It would be indecent for the dead to eat," she said so softly, so politely, that the table froze in silence. Her mother's first instinct was not alarm, but correction. "You are not dead, Marie. And we do not speak that way." Marie apologized, but she did not lift the bread. Her father, who believed illness always revealed itself through fever or rash, pressed his palm to her forehead. It was cool, but in winter, everyone's skin was cool. No cough, no wound, no fever, only the sentence repeated in small variations throughout the day. "I have no use for food. It is not my place. I do not wish to trouble the living." Neighbors, when asked years later, claimed they heard nothing unusual that morning. In winter, voices rarely carry beyond stone and snow. The Fournier children were known as dutiful, attending Mass, returning home before dusk, helping with chores without complaint. Of Marie, villagers could say little beyond her size, small, and one odd habit: she often walked with a fingertip trailing along walls, as though tracing a seam invisible to others. By evening, the family tried to let the strange remark dissolve into silence. The mother set a cup of broth near the hearth without a word. The elder sister lifted a spoon, then let it rest again. The broth cooled untouched. That night, the father checked the latch of the door, twice muttering to himself that he wasn't doing it because of his daughter's unsettling words. The third time he checked, he made no record. The next day, Marie folded linens sorted. Kindling returned to her sewing frame. She answered when spoken to, though always in the past tense. I was good at that. I used to like it. There was no playfulness, no test of boundaries. Her pale eyes simply drifted from human faces to corners of the room, to the space above the stove, where smoke had stained the wall over years of winters. By the second night, the family held a quiet council. We agreed not to speak of it outside, the mother would later recall. We agreed to make the house still. This was not secrecy born of scandal. It was a habit of survival in hard months. Troubles were kept within the walls, and solutions sought with what one had at hand. The father proposed more chores, more routine. The elder sister suggested stories. The brother was the first to suggest leaving her be. No doctor was proposed. The weather itself seemed to argue against it. Roads were glassy with rutted ice, and night was already pressing in. Instead, the family turned to small measures. The mother salted the broth a little heavier. The father cut the bread thinner. The sister placed a ribbon at the foot of Marie's bed. None of these gestures were acknowledged. Her speech remained calm, her posture upright, her hands steady. The only change was where her attention now went. When the shaving mirror was propped on the mantel to catch the weak light, Marie turned instead toward the window. Yet outside, there was nothing but a flat white field and the grey outline of a hedge. By the third morning, her refusal of reflections was complete. Her mother held out the small mirror-plane glass in a dull pewter frame. Marie turned her head with the same quiet courtesy one might use to decline a stranger's drink. "It is not mine," she said. There was no revulsion, no superstition named only removal. In the family Bible, where births and deaths were marked in tight, precise script, the mother considered making a note. She later confessed she nearly wrote her daughter's name. But the page remained blank. That afternoon, the father slid the mirror into a drawer. He warned the children not to mention it. At Mass, told them it would pass, and insisted she be kept inside. The lanes were too slick, the hedges too deep with drift, the cold worsening, and so by nightfall, the decision was sealed. Manage it at home, contain it. Close the shutters, latch the windows, put mirrors away, reduce talk, and hope for the rest. Outside, the roads to town froze over, and the name of the village doctor was never spoken. They kept her inside. The first reason was practical. The ice on the lanes could swallow a boot. whole. The second was unspoken, fewer eyes, meant fewer words escaping into the long memory of the village. In a place where one remark could outlast onions in the cellar, silence was its own economy. Marie's tasks were shifted to the interior, folding linens, sorting kindling, pinning damp cloth to the hearthline. She moved with precise effort, like someone maintaining a body she did not truly own. Mirrors were managed. The shaving glass remained in its drawer. Pewter and copper were turned to face the wall. When water spilled across the table and caught the faint blur of her face, Marie calmly pressed her palm flat against it until it soaked into the wood. She did not startle. She did not whisper of devils. She only said low and deliberate, where no one can see. And then she continued her work. Her mother maintained a rhythm of offerings, as though routine might tame the strangeness. Bread in the morning, broth at noon, a potato turned in ash by dusk. Marie would hold the bowl, warm her hands at the cup, and return them untouched. When pressed to eat for strength, she answered in the tone of a girl politely declining an apron, "I will not trouble the living." The older sister tried again, with ribbon slipping it at Marie's collar to coax a trace of normalcy. Marie unfastened it gently, folded it, and placed it in a drawer with the reverence of church linens. They spoke of her carefully, as though tiptoeing around a draft. The father clung to practicalities, keep her busy, keep the house warm, keep the children steady at their chores. The sister offered song. Marie listened politely, but never joined. The brother suggested shoveling snow with him behind the shed. Marie shook her head. "I do not go outside." When asked why, her reply carried no tremor, no hesitation, only a strange precision that lodged in their memory to keep from failing apart, not falling, failing. The missounding returned, again and again. "I used to be. I was already." Her tenses frayed like a hem coming loose, as though her words were unraveling the thread that tied her to the present. Neighbors passed, as neighbors do. The butcher's boy stomped his feet at the threshold with a wrapped parcel in hand, craning for a glimpse inside. He was met with the door, and a coin slipped quickly into his palm. The woman from 2 fields over left a jar of rendered fat, asked no questions, and was thanked only at the step. At Mass, the Fourniers arrived late, took the back pew, and slipped out before the final hymn. In the village air, where news of births and weather traveled faster than wagons, no one later remembered exactly who first used the word strange to describe them that season. But once spoken, it lingered, and it did not thaw. Marie's avoidance of reflection grew into something structural. She moved carefully through rooms on paths that avoided shine, the dark side of the stove, the strip of table already cleared, of plates, the plastered wall that broke the light unevenly. Crossing beneath a lintel, she brushed it with the back of her finger, once, twice, as if counting a door she did not expect to pass through for long. In sleep, her breathing was even. In waking, her posture was flawless. Withdrawal was not collapse. It was a slow, tidying away of self-methodical. By week's end, her mother's little ledger of remedies was filled with attempts, but yielded no results. She closed it and slid it beneath the flower bin. It was the father who finally said aloud the name they had all avoided, Martet. The local doctor. A man who knew their family by coughs and fractures, by the pneumonia that had taken an uncle 2 winters past. At first light, he said, "Because roads in this weather prefer decision." The sister fetched his wool coat. The brother carried in a lamp. In the next room, Marie sat with her hands resting lightly on her knees, eyes lowered gaze, drifting away from the black oval of the kettle as it cooled. A note was written in a careful hand and placed by the door, waiting for the errand boy when the track was firm enough to cross. The family expected something simple, a fever, to be pointed at, a salve to be prescribed, an instruction to follow. What arrived instead on boots, crunching frozen ruts, and a leather bag thudding against the table was silence. Cool fingers at a wrist, a frown, and a doctor opening his notebook as if the cure might begin with a line of ink. The frost that morning had hardened into something close to stone. Dr. Jules Marté came without haste, his small horse stamping in the yard as he brushed snow from the brim of his hat. The Fournier house was well known to him. He had delivered infants here, set bones, sat by bedsides through long nights of coughing. This time there was no stretcher, no urgent cry. Only the father opening the door wide enough for the doctor to see what waited inside. Marie sat upright in a straight-backed chair by the hearth hands placed neatly on her knees, fingers pressed together as though in prayer. Her eyes followed nothing, fixed somewhere between the wall and the floor. She did not startle when Martet drew a stool and sat before her. The examination was simple, almost routine. He lifted her wrist. The pulse was slow but steady. He pressed the backs of his fingers to her forehead. The temperature was nothing more than skin in a cold room. No rash, no swelling of glands, breath regular if faint. When asked to open her mouth, she complied. Tongue pale but unmarked. Her weight, judged at a glance, was a little less than the previous winter, though not alarming. When he asked how she felt, her reply came clear and immediate. "I do not feel at all." He tried another question. "Did she tire? I do not tire. Did she sleep? I no longer sleep. I'm only still." The words were not rushed, not whispered, but spoken in the same tone one might use to describe a fence post or a tree. In his small notebook, Martet recorded, skin pale, movements deliberate, no fever, no inflammation, appetite absent, speech coherent, fixed upon single theme, conviction of death. In the margin written in smaller script, he added a phrase he had encountered in a recent Parisian journal, le délire de négation, the delirium of negations, a disorder in which the patient denies their own existence, their organs, even life itself. He had not expected to apply it to a child. The parents stood back as he wrote. When the notebook snapped shut, they asked for medicine. He had none to give, only the simplest advice: keep her warm, offer food, encourage life if it could be encouraged. No tonic was prescribed. The doctor had refused their request. He did not mention Paris, nor any article in his journals. Instead, he left them with a single reminder: watch her closely. As though proximity itself might mend what had come undone. That night, his handwriting still sharp in the family ledger, the first change appeared. Long after the lamps were put out, a sound slipped through the hall. A faint click of a latch. the groan of a floorboard near the outer door. By morning, a thin trail of prints curved across the frost-hardened yard, halting at the fence. At breakfast, no one spoke of it. The father checked the door twice that night. By the third, Marie was gone from her bed before dawn, moving barefoot through the darkened house, fingertips brushing the frozen glass, as if marking her way. The first night they saw her, she was at the narrow window above the wash basin. Her breath clouded the pane into a pale oval. With one fingertip, she traced slowly through it until only a thin film of frost remained. When her mother asked what she was doing, Marie answered without turning, "It is my breath, leaving for good." The words carried no fear, only certainty. Uncertainty repeated. At first, it was the faint catch of her door latch, heard only by the sister in the next bed. Then the muted rhythm of bare feet across the wooden planks. Soon her nightly movements became as fixed a sound as the stove iron cooling into silence. The family learned to keep watch in turns. One listening for the latch, another sitting up with the lamp. But winters in Auvergne are long, and vigilance wears thin when mornings come early. When stopped, she offered no explanation beyond that same phrase. Sometimes she touched the frost on the panes. Sometimes she stood at the door, her palm resting on the iron bolt as though testing if it still held. Once the father found her in the yard beneath moonlight, hands clasped neatly behind her back like a schoolgirl. She told him she was measuring the air, though she gave no meaning to the words. Her sleep dwindled to brief intervals in the afternoon, often dozing in the hearth chair rather than her bed. The doctor's note remained true, no physical illness, but her body told another story. Cheeks narrowing, skin paling toward grey. The mother began to keep the kettle always warm, imagining the doctor's return, rehearsing what she would say, what she had tried. Broth was offered each dusk. It cooled untouched. One night in early March, the sister woke to find the room colder than it should have been. The shutters rattled. Marie's bed was empty. Following the sound of breath, she found her sister at the front window, palm flat against the glass. Frost melted slowly beneath her hand, leaving a wet outline that spread across the pane. They could not keep constant watch. There was livestock to tend, wood to haul, snow to clear from the roofline. Each task pulled someone away, leaving the others to trust latch and winter, cold as barriers. But both could be undone by quiet hands, or by a child who believed she had already crossed beyond their reach. By mid-March, the question of keeping her at home no longer sounded like hope. The father returned one evening from the lower pasture, his decision carried already in his voice. Claremont, he said. The nearest city. The hospital. The mother did not argue. That night, Marie rose again, moving to the window, tracing frost, as though rehearsing a route she would not need much longer. A path past the gate, down the frozen track, and into a building built to keep her from finding her way back. The choice had not come in one moment, but settled slowly over the household, like snow pressing its weight upon a roof. By early March, they no longer spoke of waiting. Each untouched meal, each turned head away from the mirror. Each midnight walk added itself to a silent tally. The father retrieved a trunk from the loft, one reserved for weddings and distant funerals. The mother laid out 2 dresses, both plain hems, carefully mended. Marie made no comment as they were folded inside. The arrangements were simple, yet carried the weight of formality, as though preparing her for a ceremony. A neighbor agreed to tend the livestock for 3 days. The priest told only that the girl was unwell in mind, nodded without question. A letter was sent to Claremont. The reply came back with a date and our instructions precise as law. The train would take them halfway. A hired carriage would complete the journey. On the morning of departure, frost had retreated, leaving the ground hard and ridged. Marie stood in the doorway, hands clasped before her, looking neither at the wagon nor at the faces gathered. Her siblings held back. The mother adjusted the scarf at her throat with hurried fingers, like dressing someone already out of reach. The train compartment was unheated. The father sat opposite, hat in his lap. Marie did not look at him, nor at the passing fields. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the wall, as if the motion beneath her belonged to someone else. The mother tried once to speak of the town they would pass, its church, its market. Marie gave no reply. When asked if she was cold, she said no and returned to stillness. Between rail and carriage, the wind pressed heavy, though none spoke of it. The driver, not told particulars, cast one glance at the girl and then fixed his eyes on the road. The wheels struck ruts in a steady rhythm. For long stretches, it was the only sound. The parents, hollowed by months of half-sleep and silent dread, let that rhythm carry them. Claremont appeared first as a seam of smoke above the hills, then as clustered roofs and stone walls. The streets near the hospital narrowed, shadowed, even under daylight. The carriage slowed at iron gates, flanked by high stone pillars. Beyond pale masonry buildings stood in severe alignment, their windows evenly spaced, their doors shut. When the carriage halted, Marie did not rise until her father stepped down. She followed without assistance, her shoes striking gravel. Without pause, her face unchanged. The porter opened the gate. The courtyard smelled faintly of chalk and coal dust. A figure in a dark coat approached ledger in hand pen, ready to capture the first line of her new record. A record that would begin with her admission, with words chosen to name her condition, and would mark, with exact precision, the moment the door closed behind her. The porter led them toward the main building, its facade pale under a thin March sun. The entrance smelled of lime wash and boiled linen. Inside, the light narrowed into stone corridors. Air held a steady chill under high ceilings, the windows arched and small. Voices carried strangely, here flattened as if pressed into paper. At the admitting desk, a clerk in a dark apron unfolded a ledger pen already dipped. The father gave her name, Fournier Marie, age 12. Origin, Saint-André, Puy-de-Dôme. Reason for referral, persistent, delusional state. The girl herself was not asked to speak. A nurse conducted the initial examination in a side room, bare save for a narrow cot and a table with basin. Her weight recorded below average, though not yet critical. Skin colorless, cool to the touch. Pulse irregular, but present. No swelling of glands, no lesions of skin or mouth. Temperature within limits. No sign of contagion. Yet in the physician's hand, a single line appears in her intake file, unlike any in the surrounding pages. Apparent general, cadaveric suffraction corpse, without decay. The phrase is underlined once lightly, just enough to catch the eye. She was assigned to the juvenile ward. 6 narrow beds, low partitions, each with a folded blanket and a chipped enamel cup. The window overlooked an inner yard where bare trees stood in exact alignment along the wall. Observation began at once. In her first hours, she sat on the bed, without removing her coat hands, resting lightly in her lap. When the nurse offered to hang it, she said, "It will not be needed." The coat remained in place. The ward bell ruled the scheduled meals at 7 noon and 6. Exercise in the yard twice a day. Prayers in the chapel on Sundays. She attended none willingly. At meals, she lifted the cup to her lips, but did not drink. At exercise, she walked the perimeter, once, then stood with her back to the sun until the bell called her in. That evening, the nurse reported no verbal outbursts, compliant with all requests, yet no voluntary speech beyond single-sentence refusals. She maintained her posture for long intervals, without fidgeting her eyes, fixed either on the floor or on a single point of wall. By the end of her second day, her presence had settled into the ward, without altering it. She neither sought contact with the other children, nor resisted when addressed. Her effect was not disruption, but subtraction, a narrowing of herself within the space. On the 7th day, the duty nurse's hand recorded behavior unchanged. Request candles at bedside. The note stood alone without commentary. Yet it marked the beginning of her first full week's profile, the entries that would over time form the baseline from which all further decline would be measured. By the end of that week, Marie's rhythm had contracted into something smaller than the hospital's own order, a private liturgy of stillness and refusal. At the breakfast bell, the other children rose. She remained seated, hands resting on her knees. A bowl of porridge placed before her, cooled untouched, its surface tightening into a skin. At the second bell, the tray was removed. No protest, no remark. Bathing was offered on alternate days. When instructed, she stood at the basin, hands resting on the porcelain rim. The water steamed faintly in the chilled air, but she did not reach for the cloth. The basin was drained, the water wasted. No refusal, no dislike, only absence. In the yard, when the group was walked in a slow circuit, she kept 2 paces behind eyes, downcast. When others spoke or laughed, her gaze did not rise. She did not acknowledge her name, not even her own. The nurse's entry on the 3rd day read, "Compliant in movement when directed, otherwise inert. Speech limited to 1 or 2 sentences per day. Content focused on death state." It was on the 4th day she made her request. Found seated on the bedcoat, still on hands folded in her lap, Marie said in a tone without plea or command, "I would light candles at my bedside." When asked why, she replied, "For when I am laid out." The phrase was copied, word for word, into the log. By the 5th day, her imagery sharpened. She asked if there was a cloth for her face. She asked if she might remain in bed until the laying out was done. No staff member refuted or encouraged. Statements were recorded, dated, initialed. In a private remark to the matron, one nurse described her simply, "A patient awaiting burial." The phrase passed in whispers among staff, but never entered the official file. Clinical language prevailed: refusal of nourishment, absence of personal care, affect flat, orientation intact. On the 7th day, her pulse was taken irregular, weaker than at admission. She tolerated the touch without reaction, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. Her weight was estimated 2 kilograms less than entry, though not formally measured. That evening, a new physician entered the ward. Dr. Adrian Lemoyne, recently assigned to the juvenile wing, read through her compiled notes in silence. He closed the folder, stood at the foot of her bed, and regarded her without speaking. Marie did not look at him. The nurse noted the duration of observation, 3 minutes, 27 seconds. Lemoyne left without a word, his hand still resting lightly on the file. The following morning, his name appeared on the cover of her record as primary physician. His first entry marked the beginning of a more deliberate examination of her mind. Within days, it would lead to the careful, almost ritual introduction of a mirror into her presence. Lemoyne began with the file. He read it twice, once in order, then again, out of sequence, moving from the parish priest's referral to the latest nurse's note. The handwriting changed, the tone did not refusal death statements, compliance without initiative. He underlined 2 phrases, candles at bedside, and laid out properly. The graphite left faint dents in the paper. His first direct examination took place in the small consultation room adjoining the juvenile ward. The consultation room was bare, the high window casting a pale light across a table with only a ledger and a single glass of water. Marie was brought in by a nurse and seated in a straight-back chair. She did not look at the physician, nor at the closing door. Lemoyne asked her name. She answered clearly, Marie Fournier. Her age, it was 12. The past tense, deliberate and steady, was not an error. He pressed further. Did she feel unwell? I do not feel. Was she alive? No. Had she died? Yes. How long ago? Some days she gave no reply at all. Her pulse was taken irregular, slightly thready. Skin cool, yet dry. Pupils reactive. Reflexes intact. No tremor. No motor deficit. Weight loss estimated at 3 to 4 kilograms. No lesions. No systemic illness. Lemoyne wrote in his notes, somatic state does not correspond to patient's self-assessment. Delusional content resistant to challenge. Beneath this, he penciled a probable diagnosis, Cotard's syndrome, the rare delusion first described in Paris 3 years earlier. Exceptionally rare in adults, almost unheard of in children. He ruled out melancholia, no agitation. Hysteria, no fits. Delirium orientation intact. What troubled him was not despair, but neutrality. She spoke as though reporting on another body, hers, yet not hers. No guilt, no punishment, only the certainty of death. He observed her quietly for 2 days. She moved only when directed avoided staff and patients and remained still in her bed for long intervals. When spoken to, her eyes lifted fractionally, never turning her head. On the 3rd day, he resolved to confront her conviction not directly, but with a tool of reflection. The mirror test, used at times in cases of paralysis or misidentification, had never been applied to such a child. His plan to measure her response, heart rate, and words when faced with her own image. Could visual fact fracture delusional certainty, he ordered a small handheld glass to be introduced under supervision. The test would take place late morning when the ward was quiet and the courtyard light fell evenly through the windows. Lemoyne selected a small oval mirror. Its pewter frame, dulled with age, the surface flawless. 2 nurses stood at her sides. Marie sat at the edge of her bedcoat, still on hands folded. The mirror was raised before her. She did not look. Her gaze fixed above it, as though blind to its presence. Only when Lemoyne angled the glass so the light caught her face did her eyes shift. The reaction was immediate, not startle, but recoil. Her body pulled sharply back, shoulders pressed against the bedpost knees, drawn up neck muscles rigid. She turned her head away, not to avoid, but to reject. Her breathing quickened, shallow. That she said voice level, but strained is only the shell left behind. The mirror was lowered at once, but her agitation deepened. She pressed herself into the narrow gap between bed frame and wall. When the nurse reached for her hand, she withdrew, eyes locked on the floorboards, as though clinging to something solid. Lemoyne noted pulse, rapid, irregular. Fingers trembling. No further questions were asked. The mirror was taken from the ward and locked away. Yet for hours afterward, Marie remained unsettled, her restlessness unfolding in small, repetitive motions. She shifted seats, rose to stand in the corner, paced a strip of wall, no longer than a coffin lid, then returned to her chair. When spoken to, her words came sharper than usual, as though speech itself was costly. By late afternoon, her body stilled again, but her gaze never once crossed the wall where the mirror had stood. The record for that day read, "Exposure to own reflection met with acute rejection. Verbal identification of image as non-self. Agitation sustained approximately 3 hours. Recommendation: discontinue direct visual confrontation." That evening, the nurses discussed gentler forms of engagement tasks that might draw her into the rhythm of life without confronting her convictions head-on. The hospital's courtyard garden was suggested. It was a square of earth within the inner walls, bordered by clipped hedges and narrow gravel paths. Patients were brought there in small groups, each given a plot no larger than a tabletop and a set of simple tools. They were meant to turn the soil-placed seeds, cover them with steady hands. The idea was that tending to growth might coax the mind toward it. The next morning, Marie was led to the farthest corner of the garden. A nurse placed a wooden-handled trowel in her hand and stepped back. Around her, the others bent quietly to their work, the steady rhythm of metal against stone carrying across the courtyard. Marie knelt, pressed the blade into the soil and began to dig, not the shallow depressions meant for seeds, but a trench, narrow and deliberate. Each pass cut deeper. She did not pause to clear roots, nor glance at the nurse beside her. When reminded to plant, she looked once into the open space she had made and said only, "It will fit." The remark was entered into her file that afternoon. On the second day, she returned to the same patch, enlarging the hollow rather than tending to anything planted. Her movements carried the weight of preparation, not cultivation. The bottom of the trench she pressed smooth with the flat of her hand. When asked why she worked this way, she answered with a single phrase, "For keeping." By the third morning, the trench had reached nearly the length of her arm. The supervising nurse, uneasy with what the act seemed to reinforce, removed the trowel and set her to clearing leaves from the gravel path. She obeyed without resistance, though her eyes lingered on the patch of earth as she passed it. That afternoon, the physician noted occupational trial discontinued. Activity interpreted by patient as preparation for burial. No observable therapeutic effect. Marie was returned to the ward that evening. The other children returned to their quiet routines of sewing scraps and folding bandages. Marie, as ever, withdrew to her bed coat, still buttoned hands, folded neatly in her lap. She spoke to no one. The nurse on duty recorded only one small detail: the faint, dark line of soil still clinging beneath her fingernails. That evening, a porter delivered a sealed envelope to the juvenile ward. On its front was the careful, deliberate hand of her father, the ink smudged slightly where it had been blotted. The nurse placed it on the small table beside her bed. Marie did not reach for it. When her eyes did pass across the envelope, her face gave no change at all. The nurse resolved to observe her reaction in the morning. But by then, the unopened letter still rested on the table, and Marie had already spoken the words that would render its delivery meaningless. The envelope lay untouched for 2 days, until a nurse with practiced gentleness asked if she wished to open it. Marie turned her head toward it, regarding the object as though it belonged to another's room. Her voice was steady when she replied, "The dead do not receive post." She repeated the sentence each time the question returned. At first, the letter was moved from table to foot of the bed, then to a drawer, and finally to the ward clerk's file. It remained sealed. A week later, a second envelope arrived, the handwriting darker, firmer, as though weight could be pressed into steadiness. The nurse held it out by 2 fingers, careful not to impose it upon her. Marie refused to touch it. "It is not addressed to me," she said, though her name was written clearly in her father's hand. The letter joined the first. The clerk made a brief note: correspondence received. Patient refuses, preserved intact, and so a rhythm settled over the ward. Each week on market day, new envelopes arrived with the porter's bundle. Each week, they were placed briefly on her table, glanced at, refused, then carried to the cabinet. The matron ordered no intrusion. The physician did not press. In the file, a single line covered 3 weeks' parental letters, weekly, all refused. Patient states identity incompatible with receipt. Her refusals were constant, but the way she gave them altered. The first letters were declined in her usual level, voice, eyes steady. By the fourth, the words had softened the breath before them grown shorter. By the sixth, the nurse noted she lifted a hand to her throat before speaking, as though drawing the sentence from a greater depth. Her life in the ward diminished with the same slow progression. She moved less between bed and chair. When prompted to stand, she obeyed, but always after a pause, like negotiating with a body that no longer belonged to her. The enamel cup near her pillow, always refilled at rounds, often sat untouched from morning to night. Weight was not recorded, but the signs spoke plainly. Sleeves hanging loose, knees rising sharp beneath the blanket shadows, deepening in the hollows of her cheeks. Her pulse remained irregular, her skin cool. The nurse's private note, awaiting burial, no longer read as metaphor. It read as schedule. If any letter drew more than indifference, it was the one sealed with a crooked bead of wax hurriedly closed. She watched as it was placed on her table, then turned away. When asked softly whether she wished to open it, she repeated the same phrase and then gave the smallest settling of her shoulders, as if the refusal itself cost her something. By then, the stack of unopened letters had reached 7, then 8. Their presence changed the ward, not by sound, but by their silent accumulation. A ledger of care returned, unanswered. In the days that followed, her refusals turned from words to the body itself. The cup remained full. A spoon pressed to her lips was accepted, but she let it cool against her tongue until it was taken away. To stand drew a tremor. To walk required a guiding hand beneath her elbow. The entries in her file had grown clipped, almost skeletal, intake negligible. Hydration uncertain. Stamina poor. On a July morning, heat pressed against the courtyard walls, the sun falling square across the path. The children of the ward were led out for their daily circuit. Marie rose only after the second request. She walked once around the gravel path. Her steps measured her gaze, fixed low. At the far corner near the clipped hedge, she reached toward the wall, as though steadying herself against something invisible. The nurse, watching, lifted a hand to guide her on. But Marie's knees gave way. Her eyes narrowed to slits. She fell forward into the gravel without sound. In the courtyard log, the word collapse was underlined twice. It happened in the 3rd week of July. The morning was already heavy with heat, the air still. The nurse, counting the children as they moved in their slow circuit, noticed Marie at the rear as usual, quiet, deliberate, her pace steady. At the far corner, she placed her hand against the hedge, paused and crumpled forward with no protective gesture. When they lifted her from the ground, her skin was hot to the touch, but the body beneath felt too light, almost weightless within its frame. Her lips were cracked at the corners. The pulse, when finally located, was rapid but irregular. She did not open her eyes. Gravel dust clung to the hem of her coat as 2 orderlies carried her inside. In the infirmary, she was placed on a narrow bed head, turned to one side. The attending physician recorded severe malnutrition, marked dehydration, approximate weight 25 kilograms, fatal risk imminent without intervention. Attempts to rouse her met only half success. A faint tightening of the fingers, a brief flicker of her eyes without focus. A cup of water touched to her lips was accepted, but not drawn in. Broth cooled to avoid startling her brought the same absence. By afternoon, her breathing steadied, but remained shallow. The nurses rotated watch. They wiped her face, adjusted the single pillow, dampened her lips with cloth. The ledger reduced it all to a line: patient recumbent, intake nil, hydration absent, consciousness intermittent. The matron ordered continuous observation. A folding screen was drawn around her bed, both to protect the other patients from the sight and to keep the order of the ward intact. Behind the screen, Dr. Lemoyne lingered longer than the others. He compared the notes to what lay before him. The pattern was unbroken: verbal declarations of death refusal, of correspondence withdrawal from activity, slow wasting of the body. And now, this collapse. Recovery, if possible at all, would be narrow, drawn out, uncertain. As the evening bell sounded in the courtyard, Lemoyne closed the folder and issued the next order without lifting his eyes. enteral feeding to commence at first light. The method was primitive, almost brutal in its simplicity. Rubber tubing a glass funnel liquid sustenance prepared thin enough to flow. The nurse who wrote down the order added her own line in the margin: patient, unresisting but absent. Will require assistance to hold in position. That night, the infirmary lights burned past the usual hour. Outside, the rest of the ward moved through its familiar cycle bell bed, silence. Inside the arrangement stood ready on a side table, tubing coiled funnel, gleaming broth, thinned and waiting. Before dawn, the air was heavy with disinfectant and the faint odor of boiled linen. Marie lay as she had through the night, eyes half-lidded, her hands resting lightly atop the blanket. When the nurses raised her to a sitting position, she did not resist. Her head tipped forward until the physician lifted her chin in his hand. The tubing was readied with deliberate calm, its end dipped lightly in oil, the glass funnel resting empty in the nurse's hand. Lemoyne gave no explanation. There was nothing left to negotiate. The tube was guided into her nostril, advanced slowly until it reached the back of her throat. She did not resist. No gag, no recoil, only a faint tightening at the corner of her mouth betrayed its passage. The broth was poured thin and steady, slipping downward with gravity's quiet insistence. Halfway through, her eyes opened. She did not look at the physician, nor at the nurses who held her upright, but past them toward the wall. In a voice level and unbroken, she said, "Soil will not grow." The sentence hung in the air, too measured for delirium, too final for reply. When the funnel was lifted and the tube withdrawn, she swallowed once, as though clearing a trace from her throat, then sank back against the pillow. The procedure had lasted less than 10 minutes. Her pulse was checked, still erratic, perhaps slower. The nurses wiped her face, smoothed the blanket, and stepped back. Through the hours that followed, there was no change. She did not vomit, but neither did color return to her cheeks. The chart recorded each detail with precision, volume, consistency, time. In the margin, Lemoyne added a single word: ineffectual. By evening, she had resumed her silence, refusing even the water placed at her lips. No agitation, no outward pain, only the same stillness that had outlasted every measure taken against it. That night, Lemoyne reviewed her record, from the first parish note to the day's last entry. The line of progression was unbroken declaration of death, rejection of correspondence, withdrawal from activity, refusal of intake, physical wasting. No indication of reversal. He marked her prognosis as poor, the word, framed by 2 neat pencil lines, then returned the file to the shelf. The following morning, the ward bell rang. As usual, children led into the courtyard, but the infirmary shutters stayed drawn. Inside, the nurses moved softly around her bed, their work reduced to keeping her warm, clean, and breathing, though with each hour, their eyes returned more often to the door, as if waiting for the inevitable. By week's end, one final entry replaced all others. A line without instruction, without remedy. August 1883, late afternoon. Infirmary. The attending physician recorded 2 words on the central line: sans retour. Without return? His pen dragged once across the final letter, not flourish, only to keep the ink from pooling. The time of death was noted to the minute. Below, in the space allotted for cause, he wrote inanition, starvation secondary to persistent refusal of intake. There was no mention of delusion here. That word had appeared only in earlier notes, where another hand had scrawled délire de négation beside the long columns of weight pulse and refusals. The nurse on duty signed her initials after performing the simplest confirmations: absence of breath, absence of pulse, pupils fixed. The sheet was drawn to her shoulders, then replaced. The folding screen was pulled tighter. A basin was brought, water-warmed cloths laid out. The washing was done carefully, but without ceremony, face hands, the pale triangle of collarbone. Her limbs moved easily beneath the linen. Her coat, worn through most of her weeks, here remained on its hook untouched. In Lemoyne's private notebook, separate from the official registry, a single phrase was written that would not appear elsewhere: death by belief. It was not enclosed in quotation marks. It was not attributed to any one voice. It was written because it had been said, not because it could be proven. The certificate was completed in the administrative office. The clerk's hand was neat, the ink dark, the seal pressed, while the wax was warm. The words were standard, stripped of atmosphere, carrying only the authority of the embossed circle. In the registry book, her name was inscribed, once uncrossed. The line was complete. Back in the infirmary, the sheet was drawn over her face. The small request she had voiced weeks earlier to be laid out with candles was observed only in part. 2 candles were placed at the head of the bed, unlit in daylight. The blanket was tucked close at the sides, as though against a draft. In the clerk's cabinet, the letters from home remained where they had always been sealed, ordered, unopened. The institution kept its silence, but the details survived in margins and side notes, in the handwriting of people reluctant to admit what they had seen. Perhaps that is why her story feels unfinished. And so, in the records of Claremont, Marie disappears. But here with us tonight, her story lingers faint as the hollow of a pillow no one admits to seeing. If you've stayed with me to the end, subscribe to the 7th Mark, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something about knowing we're here together, across years, across places, across lives, that leave their trace, even when they never return. And so, the file is closed, the pages are silent, but the echoes of the story remain. Some mysteries never really end. They just fade into the darkness, leaving faint traces in the memories of time. If you have accompanied me until this moment, thank you very much. You can subscribe to the Sleepy History Tales channel so that every time a new story is told, you will be here with me, immersed in the forgotten secrets of the past. Leave me a little message in the comments. Where are you listening to this story? And at what time? I would love to know. Until we meet again in the next story, I wish you a peaceful sleep and sweet dreams.